Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tuesday Tips. I am your host, Marin Smith, content manager here at Grow Schools. And as usual, we're here Tuesdays, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern for 10 minutes discussing the biggest challenges facing school leaders. And today we're welcoming Mary Dillon. Hi, Mary. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Mary is our Associate Director of Real Estate Management at Grow Schools, and we're here for a discussion on negotiating your school's lease. And Mary, I know that lease obligations represent one of the largest line items in school budgets. So understanding how to prepare for lease obligations, especially this time of year, approach landlord conversations strategically, and really kind of think ahead can help schools maintain that financial stability while they're securing the facility terms that they need. So let's start with preparation. My first question for you is, what should schools start doing right now to prepare for next year's lease obligations and ensure accurate budgeting?
Well, lots of things they can do to help themselves. And I would say schools should start by getting a firm grip on every lease term and obligation, knowing exactly what you're responsible for and what the landlord is also supposed to handle. That can really help. When you track your enrollment closely and push harder on marketing if your enrollment is dipping, your space requirements and budget really depend on that. Look at whether you're maximizing the space you already have. For example, multi-purpose rooms, combined uses, and flexible scheduling can stretch your footprint without adding to any additional costs. So they're all things you can kind of just do within your own capacity. Other things I would recommend is that you dig into your operating expense history. Too many schools overlook pass-throughs. For example, CAM charges, taxes and insurance. These are often areas where the budget can take the biggest kind of hit on those items. Also, if major repairs are coming up, for example, roof items, roof replacement or repairs, costly HVAC repairs or even replacements, painting of the facility are just a few things that you need to figure out whether they are your responsibility or if they're their landlord's responsibility. If they are the school's responsibility, you should start to plan years ahead so that the cost doesn't wreck your budget when it hits. Finally, stay on top of critical dates. So in your lease, there will be notice periods, escalation triggers, CPI adjustments, and renewal deadlines. So don't allow those items to sneak up on you.
And speaking of renewals, for a lot of schools, those are coming up. So anything else that schools should be thinking about right now?
Yeah, I think evaluate the condition of the building. So if the landlord is asking for a higher rate, but hasn't invested, say, in improvements in the building, that's an opening to negotiate capital items like playground upgrades, or maybe they can help pay for some HVAC units, things like that. If the lease also, if it doesn't automatically renew, pay attention to notice periods to give your landlord, and be transparent with the landlord about your needs and your affordability. Let them know exactly what you need and what would best suit your needs, and then you can take negotiations from there. I'd also say don't focus only on rent, because there's other things you can do that can help with your own financials in the background, like the term, the length of the term, renewal clarity, caps on operating expense increases, and early termination options. And the final one is rent-free periods. These are all levers that can be just as valuable as shaving a little bit off the base rent.
Yeah, seems like similar advice to buying a car, right? Like, don't focus
there you go. Exactly.
on the monthly payment. Yep. Think about the overall price, the length of the loan. All of those factors are kind of in that matrix of decision making.
Exactly.
So, yeah, great advice. Just want to take a quick pause and welcome those of you who might be joining us a little after the top of the hour. We're here with Mary discussing lease negotiation strategies and budgeting best practices too for schools right here in budgeting season. So you can catch all our conversations with experts covering these challenges and others facing school leaders right here, Tuesdays, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. So back to our chat with Mary. I have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Next up, how should schools approach conversations with landlords about lease terms and budgeting concerns? Seems like it can get tricky.
It can do, but it doesn't have to. So, what I would say is, as best you can, lead with the facts. So, your enrollment data, your funding projections, and budget constraints, they speak louder than anything, right? Make your value clear to the landlord. I would say, schools really do bring long term stability, they have deep community presence, and they're predictable occupancy, and landlords don't always get that for most tenants. So really kind of lean into that, because and make it clear that you can bring more value in those ways as a tenant. I would say, make a business plan, because whenever you can provide a business plan to a prospective landlord, they like to see, even if you're not where you want to be on your budget and your financials, presenting a business plan to show here's where we are, but here's where we're going to get to, can always be very, very helpful. I would say push for transparency on operating expenses. Ask the landlord for line item breakdowns and an explanation for any increases that have happened, because sometimes if you understand the why behind, it can help as well. Landlords often do have more room to move on CAM expenses and pass through items rather than on base rent, which I did already mention earlier. I would say come with solutions. If the proposed rent hike just isn't workable, offer a stepped increase, a longer term, or target improvements that just may justify the number for you. But there's always, once you have time and you have good conversations, you can often, negotiate on both sides.
Yeah. And then looking at that number, that goes into my next question, which what are some warning signs that indicate that lease cost is getting outside the realm of what's comfortable?
Yeah, I would say that lease costs that outpace your budget growth are a big red flag. And also, if the rent climbs faster than your revenue or funding, you kind of know you're heading for a little bit of trouble, And, when program budgets start shrinking to cover facility costs, no one wants to have to do that. No school will ever want to do that. And that's a sign that the situation is kind of deteriorating. So, watch your facility cost as a share of per pupil revenue. That's a good way of doing it. And if the per pupil rent burden creeps too high, the long-term sustainability of that will become in jeopardy, And if rent spikes repeatedly wipe out your ability to build reserves, your margin for error is disappearing. So just pay attention to all of the small detail in the lease. And I would say time is your biggest thing, and open communication are big ones.
Yeah. Great advice. Last question is rather broad. Just any other best practices that you haven't mentioned already, and you've mentioned so many.
I think just to kind of follow on what I've mentioned a few times, and time is the big one when you're negotiating a lease. And if you see red flags, or even not red flags, but that your lease is coming up for renewal, give yourself plenty of time to open those discussions, because by having those discussions, I would suggest 18 to 24 months ahead of renewal is ideal, because then neither party is getting backed into a corner. The school isn't. And, you can keep an eye on market rates. You're not scrambling for comparisons at the last minute. And, the school themselves can be honest with themselves about their budget, where their budget sits, and their space needs, their enrollment trends, and their financial limits. And when you have time to look at all of those aspects, and you've time to discuss them with your landlord, it can always give a positive outcome the more time you have.
Yeah, never too early.
Never too early, but it can always be too late. Well, never too late.
Yeah, right. Easier to
but
be
never too early. Yes,
right,
for
right.
sure. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Mary, I want to thank you for all of your insights today. For those of you watching, you can learn more about lease negotiation and real estate management support on our website. Just head over to growschools.com, check out our resource library. Thanks again to Mary and everyone who joined us today. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.